G'day, Professor Joseph Drew here. I'm here to talk to you about yet another new publication I've had just accepted at the world's best local government journal, Local Government Studies, regarding the outcomes, the fiscal outcomes from amalgamation. Look, before we get into things, can I please ask for a favour? Help me to help others. I want you to do three things for me. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe. If you haven't given this video the thumbs up, please give it the thumbs up. What it means is it will pop up in more people's feed and we might get a decision maker watching this video and making better decisions in the future. And finally, if you know anyone at all in local government or is interested in local government, flick them the link to this video so that we can get more people having good information so that they can make better decisions for the benefit of everyone. So this journal paper has been accepted unconditionally at Local Government Studies. It uses a 17-year panel of data. It is actually, or will be, the longest study of amalgamation in Australia ever. Now, it's based on the Queensland amalgamations that happened 2008. But don't tune out if you're from New South Wales, because the findings from this research are just as important to people in New South Wales as any other state. And indeed, if you're in Western Australia that's been considering amalgamations again, or Tasmania that recently considered it, hang on, because the same things keep happening time over time after time in every state. So the lessons that we learned from studying Queensland, looking at 17 years of data, will be the same lessons that you need to learn for your own jurisdiction. So essentially, this is the findings. So it started in 2008, the amalgamations, and you can see initially there were net savings for the first few years. This dark line is the one that you really should be looking at. The dotted lines are what we call confidence intervals. So we can't be sure that it's not within these ranges, but we think the actual result, we're pretty sure the actual result is here in the middle. So you can see for the first few years, it was saving money. There were net savings from the amalgamations, and that's a good thing. It's also very different to what happened in New South Wales, which is why New South Wales is such a concern to me. Then we got into this mid-period where we were having net costs arising from amalgamation. And then finally we got into longer term where realistically I think it's pretty fair to say there's no difference. Sometimes it's slightly net savings, sometimes it's net cost, but overall there's no difference. Now, to work out what's behind this graph, we did the really super complicated mathematics, which is the trade of econometricians. It's called multiple regression analysis. The specific type we did was difference and difference analysis. So what we can do is we can control for every conceivable factor that influences local government expenditure and then just isolate simply the effect of amalgamation. And when we do so, this is the graph that we get. And as I say, in the first 3 or 4 years following amalgamation in Queensland, they were saving the amalgamated councils. And the next period, it was costing them extra money compared to the non-amalgamated councils. And in this longest term, well, you could really say there's no difference at all. So all that disruption, all that angst, and overall, it probably hasn't made much difference. Now, why has this happened? Well, there's a number of reasons why we expect savings to occur following amalgamation. Now, one of those things is just scrutiny. When attention is on local governments, they will be more efficient and they will be more careful about their spending. We also had economies of scale. So each one of these has a different line, and I'm not going to trace each line because we'll be here forever. So you can pause your YouTube slide and you can trace the lines yourself. Economies of scale, it should produce some savings. But all those things, they don't happen all at once. So with economies of scale, you're not expecting huge savings in that first 0 to 4 year time frame. Why? Because some contracts have to be cancelled for you to actually reap the savings that are expected with materials and contract and procurement. Often there's prohibition on making staff redundant for the first 3 years, so you're not expecting a lot of economies of scale in those first 0 to 4 years. If you're going to get any economies of scale, they're going to really occur in this midterm here. And then if you're in terms of redundancies, in terms of materials and contract. But then if you're waiting for economies of scale to arrive through natural attrition, and I covered this in previous videos, where you're not prepared to make staff redundant, you'll just wait till they retire, and then when they retire you won't replace their position, well then you could be looking at the long term, greater than 10 years before you start to get these savings. So we're expecting different savings to occur and be greater or less at different times. And that's what's coming out in that earlier graph you saw of what actually happened in Queensland. So just to make sure everyone's clear on that, the graph in the previous slide is actually what happened in Queensland, looking at the full 14 years following the amalgamations. This graph that's in front of you is explaining how each type of saving is expected to occur at a different time and is also expected to be a different magnitude at different times. And of course we've also got not just savings, but expenses. And one of the big expenses is strategic behaviour. Just prior to amalgamation, when councils know they're going to be amalgamated, they will behave strategically, and that will bind councils to future costs. You have the cost of the amalgamations themselves, of course, and then you've got this harmonisation cost, almost always ignored by our commercial consultants who do such a rubbish job of all these amalgamation business cases. Harmonisation costs, what are they? Basically, if you put two councils side by side together, it's not unreasonable that everyone in the councils will expect the same level of services. So say Council 1 had a heated swimming pool and Council 2, which was amalgamated with them, didn't have a heated swimming pool. Well, not long after amalgamation, they'll say, well, you know, we're all one council now, we're all paying the one tax bill, we want a heated swimming pool as well. Say Council A had 2 bins picked up once a fortnight, but Council B has 3 different bins picked up once a week. After amalgamation, what's going to happen? Council A is going to say, well, we're all one council, we're all paying the same fees, we want 3 bins picked up once a week too. And there's all those harmonisations, not just of services, but also of infrastructure, and also of staff wages. Often the staff wages at local governments, adjoining local governments, will be set at slightly different levels, and they have to be harmonised up too. And guess which direction they go? Up. You can hardly turn around to a community or a staff member and say, oh, you're going to receive less, or you're going to be paid less because we amalgamated. It's never going to wash. So what happens is we tend to harmonise up, which is this huge cost burden on amalgamated councils, almost always ignored, and it explains a lot of the reason why amalgamations typically fail to deliver. So what does it all mean? And as I say, these lessons are important for every local government right around the world, every local government system in Australia, and the ones in New South Wales who I know are very concerned about the disastrous local governments from 2016, as am I. So first of all, we know amalgamations probably, we can now see from 17-year panel data that amalgamations probably aren't going to have any long-term benefits at all. There's a lot of disruption, a lot of expense. In all likelihood, it's not going to produce any enduring benefits anyway, and there's reasons for that, which I go into in the paper. So therefore, we need to start looking at more efficacious policies. And there's a heap of things we can do to make local government more efficient and more sustainable. I deal with this all the time in my research. There's such a huge volume of scholarly research out in the best journals in the world showing a whole heap of things we could do to make local government stronger. I regularly do financial sustainability analysis for different councils, particularly councils who feel they're in trouble. And I regularly find lots and lots of ways that they can make themselves stronger, which don't involve the huge disruption and the huge cost and the chance of failure that we have when we look at amalgamation. The third thing we need to learn from this is we need to get real experts involved. What's characteristic of all these amalgamations, including the Queensland ones, is we didn't have real local government expertise involved in deciding which councils would amalgamate with what, and whether it was indeed a good idea to amalgamate at all, and whether it was better to try some of these alternatives. That's the number one characteristic of local government amalgamation in Australia, is that we don't get experts involved. Now, as I often say on radio and TV, that's exactly the same as going to your local GP, general practitioner, for brain surgery and not being very happy with the outcomes of the operation. It's hardly surprising. If you're going to get a non-expert to advise you on something that is so unique as local government finances, you're not going to have good outcomes. So if you're a decision maker out there, please, can you listen to the plea that I've been giving for at least 10 years? Get proper bona fide experts involved. Stop going to these commercial consulting companies. They're very good at what they do, accounting, auditing, corporate takeovers, wonderful at that sort of stuff, but they are not specialists in local government. And when it comes to local government reform, you need the brain surgeon, not the general practitioner. And amalgamations in other jurisdictions are likely to follow this pattern. So remember, the pattern was early savings when the tension's on things and when some of those bigger costs haven't kicked in yet. Later on, we're going to have net costs rather than net savings. When some of those bigger costs do kick in, we haven't reaped all the savings yet. And towards the end, 10 years out, we're looking at basically no effect at all. Now, what concerns me about places like New South Wales is this. I've shown in my other research, and there's other videos on this, in 2 A-ranked journals now, double-blind peer-reviewed journals, that the New South Wales amalgamations in that first early period have been an absolute unmitigated disaster. They've resulted in additional expenditure of about 11%. Now, if we start in the early phase with a disaster, and we know that the middle phase typically results in even lower outcomes, we are heading off the edge of a fiscal abyss. And I don't think the decision makers in New South Wales realise how serious the problem is. If you watch my video about the disastrous rate cap recommendations for next year, you know that we've got that additional problem to overcome as well. And there's ways of avoiding this catastrophe, avoiding the hurt, the suffering and the pain that communities are going to experience. And once again, personal appeal to decision makers. If you're the new Minister of Local Government, if you're at the OLG, if you're at a local government and you realise you've got a problem but you don't know how to fix it, get in contact with me and I'll help you through that problem. We don't have to have more communities suffer, and that's what I want to save and not see happen. That's why I spend the time on these YouTube videos and I make the videos, and I ask you to help me by disseminating these videos and subscribing so I can make more of them so we can save more people from that sort of pain and catastrophe. Look, thank you very much for your time. As I say, if you found this video helpful, please help me, help others. Give me the thumbs up, subscribe, and send this link to someone you know that's interested in local government. Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.